Friends, the lecture we have today is titled as Pedagogy of Film Studies at an Advanced Level. We have the privilege of having Professor Aysha Iqbal Vishwamohan to deliver this lecture to us today. Professor Aysha Iqbal belongs to the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Madras. She has been working in the areas of film studies, popular culture, American literature, and drama. She has published a large number of articles in peer-reviewed journals from both national and international forums. But she has three very important books. The first one is Arthur Miller, The Dramatist and His Universe. The second one is an anthology, which is Stardom in Contemporary Hindi Cinema, Celebrity and Fame in Globalized Times. She has also written Behind the Scenes, Contemporary Bollywood Directors, and Post-Liberalization Indian Novels in English, Global Reception and Politics of Award. She has been awarded the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute Canadian Faculty Enrichment Program Award in 2009, and she also did a project on cinema of social consciousness funded by the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, Calgary, Canada. She has been making a large number of programs on the MOOC platform, and she has developed distance learning courses for various universities. We are really very privileged to have Professor Aysha Iqbal with us today, and we look forward to her presentation on pedagogy of film studies at an advanced level. Professor Aysha Iqbal Vishwamohan.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I am Aysha Iqbal Vishwamohan. I am professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Madras. I teach drama, American literature, popular culture, and film studies. So it's a pleasure being with all of you, wonderful people. I thank Ramanujan College, which is I know that it's a very prestigious college affiliated to the University of Delhi. And I also would take this opportunity to thank Professor Nirmalya Samanta for having me. It's such a pleasure being with all of you. And the topic of my talk today, I wouldn't call it a lecture. So the topic of my talk today is the pedagogy of film studies. I have tried to incorporate the conventional pedagogical issues as well as more recent, more contemporary. So I do hope you benefit something from this, and here I go. So what do I'd like to first start with what do I do when I teach film studies. So who do I teach film studies? As you know, I teach at IIT Madras, and the course takers are mainly students of MA who are doing this we have a 5-year integrated MA program at IIT Madras. So the course is opted by them as well as our BTech students, the engineering students from our engineering stream. So this course caters to a range of audience, a range of students. What do I do in this particular course? So let me begin with, broadly speaking, film studies comprise the following. When we talk about something called mise en scène, okay, there's a term, and I'm sure that this is a seminar of film studies. So this term you would come across very frequently during the course of this seminar. So this term is mise en scène. It's a French word which is like putting together a scene, putting a scene together. So film studies, Misasaw is a very important aspect of understanding cinema and film studies. What does it tell us? It tells us about aspects of film language. And language, as you know, English language, any language, it's our mother tongues, our national language, English language, every language has a set of rules, codes, and conventions. It has its language. Okay, so English has, cinema has its own language. When we talk about cinema's language, cinematic grammar, so to speak, it includes set designs, sets, props, costumes. So all fall under the broad category of production design. Then we have lights. So sometimes we have dim light, we have soft light, we have bright lights, we have harsh lights. Filmmakers use these kinds of lights to convey certain kinds of emotions and ideas. They are not just there, but they actually convey something. Okay, sometimes filmmakers don't use artificial lights at all. They prefer to shoot in natural lights. Sholay, for example, the scene where Gabbar Singh massacres Sanjeev Kumar, who plays Thakur Baldev Singh, his family. So Ramesh Sippy, uh, you can read Anupama Chopra's book, Making of Sholay. So I was going through that, and it was mentioned that Mr. Ramesh Sippy waited for the sun to set in a particular way. He wanted a particular kind of light, natural light. It was all shot in open location, if you remember. Much of Sholay was shot. They constructed a set somewhere, uh, in some kind of interiors of Karnataka. So, therefore, you have all those beautiful rocks. So, Ramesh Sippy shot that particular scene not using artificial lights, but he waited for the sun to set in a particular way, and when he got the particular look, only then he shot. So therefore, every filmmaker has some kind, like an artist, like an artist decides what palette of colors he wants to use or she wants to use. An author, a writer decides what kinds of language he or she wants to use, right? Okay, so Vikram Seth would use another set of codes, conventions, and language of writing, and Arundhati Rai would use something else. She has another way of using the language. So likewise, every filmmaker has their own cinematic language. So you have lights, and then you have sound. So sound plays an important role. What kind of sound you want to use in that particular scene. Okay, sometimes we even have silences, lengthy silences, and they also speak to us. It's all part of cinematic language. Actors' performance. Now, a lot depends on actors' performance. And so, understanding an actor's performance also becomes a part of reading the cinematic language. Sometimes an actor is chosen because he or she is a huge star. Okay, so you have, let's say, Ranveer Singh movie. I'm talking to the very young amongst you. So when there is Ranveer Singh, there is a huge star here. Okay, so you expect certain kind of performance when you have a major star like that. When you have a major star like Ranveer Singh performing, then you know that you expect certain kinds of mm, uh, a stylized kind of an acting. If you are watching a Priyanka Chopra movie, then there is a different kind of expectations. Okay. Likewise, if you're watching, let's say, a movie which has Nawazuddin Siddiqui or Rajkumar Rao, okay, who are more understated performers. Okay, brilliant performers, but they are not as flamboyant as Ranveer Singh or any other, someone who is very commercial. So we don't have, so performance also becomes a part of the cinematic language. You know what you expect from this actor and from this director. So those things are important to consider. And then of course you have things such as camera movement. There are certain directors whose cameras are never still. They move. They are very very active. Yeah, they move all the time. For example, if you watch Martin Scorsese's cinema, watch something like called The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio, and you will find the camera is always moving. Okay, because what he's trying to express is that agitated state frame of mind of the central character. And then, of course, you have editing. Editing plays an important role in understanding cinema. An important part of the cinematic language, and so on. For example, let me say, I was talking about camera shots, camera movements, camera angles. So consider the close up. A close up, as you know, all of us are familiar with it. There are extreme close ups also. There are close ups where the entire screen is filled with the actor's face. Sometimes it's to denote to capture the beauty of the star. For example, you are watching a movie starring, let's say, Tom Cruise, or closer home Aishwarya Rai, and these are stars. These are very beautiful and glamorous stars. So you want to filmmakers capitalize on this aspect also. So they give you the close up of their faces. So, and lingering close up so that you can watch them, you can appreciate the beauty of these stars. There was a movie, I think it was made in the 1950s. It was directed by George Stevens. It's called A Place Under the Sun. And it has beautiful, some of the most beautiful close-up shots of the leading pair, Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor, a very young Elizabeth Taylor. I would suggest you watch it because people have written, when people talk about close-ups, etc., you can never get away from that particular movie, A Place in the Sun. Okay, George Stevens directed it, and look at the way he has used close-ups. Okay, so close-ups also sometimes signifies the significance of the image and emphasize it, and sometimes extreme close-ups of a particular uh, part of the face. For example, it could be your eyes, it could be the character's eyes. For example, again, you think of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. The movie opens with an extreme close up shot of Robert De Niro's eyes because he's supposed to be this, um, very angst ridden, alienated character, a misfit in the New York City, and the agitation that is happening in his mind. So it's a very interior character. He's a very introverted character. He doesn't talk too much. He's inarticulate. How can we understand what is going on in the mind of this particular character? We see the anxiety in his eyes, and that's sort of an establishing shot that you're watching a movie about a taxi driver and you're going right inside the mind of the character. So extreme close-ups often serve to highlight emotions and drama. At the same time, when we are talking about mise-en-scène, cinematic language, we should also consider something like camera angle. And camera angle is the placement in relation to the object or person on view, what camera wants you to see. I'll give you a very good example. I'm sure you remember Gully Boy. Zoya Akhtar's Gully Boy. The movie opens and you find it's tracking a character. You know that Ranveer Singh is the main lead in this movie. But when we see that character's face, we realize that it's not Ranveer Singh. But Zoya Akhtar has spent so much time tracking a person who is not, in the conventional sense, the hero of this film. Generally, especially when we watch a mainstream Hindi cinema, Hindi film, we know that camera is always following the leading man or the leading lady. But here it is following the hero's best friend. Okay, I think that role is played by this very good actor called Vijay Sharma. Um, and then we find that we look at him, we see him, he's coming, moving towards us, and then from the sideways, you see, from behind Vijay's character, you find Ranveer Singh walking towards us. Camera never stops; it's never still. Okay, but Ranveer Singh doesn't get a hero's entry. And if those of you who are extremely, what I would say, film buffs or very fond of watching movies, you know that cinema has a way of introducing the heroes. Okay, so there would be a lot of music, there would be a lot of expectations, there would be a lot of drama created when the hero appears on the scene for the first time. Okay, but that doesn't happen in Gully Boy. Why she chooses to do this, why does the director choose to do this? Well, you have to talk to her. Maybe this is her vision of the movie. Okay, that's her. She is not talking about a larger than life character here. So Murad's character, that is Ranveer's character Murad in Gully Boy, is not a conventional heroic hero. He's an everyman. He's the boy next door. He's a gully boy. So perhaps he doesn't require that kind of an introduction. He's just part of this gang. And then he has his dreams and aspirations. So he makes something of his life. But then he doesn't start off as a larger than life character. I hope you understand what I mean. You watch a Tom Cruise movie, you watch a Schwarzenegger movie, you will realize that there is a lot of drama and hype created before the actor actually appears on the screen. Not here. Okay. And then sometimes camera angle can also be used for aesthetic and psychological purposes. We have something low angle camera. Okay, where the camera low angle in cinematography, where the camera is placed below eye level and looks up at the subject. So you find suddenly, close up shots of the hero's feet walking. Sometimes you even feel that a shoe is right in your face. Okay, so that extreme close up of his shoe, and then low camera angle, and then camera looks up at the actor. This is a star. He is being presented like a larger than life character and suggesting power, strength, and domination. Leading men generally get these kinds of introduction or these kinds of camera angle. Okay, so you can also relate it. Those of you who are interested in gender studies, you can talk about how the masculine power, the machismo is portrayed through certain kind of camera angles. At the same time, you have a high angle where where the camera is placed much above and it looks down, and the people are reduced to ants. They are nothing, insignificant. Hitchcock does it very often. Okay, so in certain there are some movies where for example, there is a movie called Rope. Okay, and you find that camera is placed on top and there are people going on the street and they are insignificant. They are nothing. That's what he's trying to tell you. So this is something that that camera angle becomes extremely important. Okay, so when I was talking about pedagogy of film studies, I always tell my students that these are the things to look at. These are the major things to consider. How the camera moves, okay? How scenes you know transit from one scene to another, how shots are taken, how shots are attached, or how shots are sutured into each other. So these are the things that you need to understand, how a director creates a set, what are the props that he places on the set. Everything communicates an idea, unless he's a very careless director, okay, who doesn't really who just wants to complete a movie. Okay, so there are such kinds of filmmakers also, but we are not talking about them. We are talking about those directors who take a lot of time in creating certain kind of a dramatic space, a cinematic space. And when they put a certain thing in a certain place, it has a meaning. It's not just there because they have nothing else to do. They just want to fill up a space. But it's there because it denotes certain kind of a meaning. All right. So, yeah, cinematic language is one aspect of filmmaking, film reading a film, or appreciating a film, or enjoying a film's aesthetics. Okay. So, language of cinema is extremely important. I cannot stress enough on that. So, this is something that I often do in my class. I of all also because I want to tell you how I go about with my my discussions, how they develop during a course. So I'm also quite interested in film genres. So genre, what is a genre? Genre is a French word. Basically, it is a category. Okay, so genre is defined as an interaction between institutions. mm, uh, by institutions, we mean media producers and critics, uh, audiences, and the text. By text here, we mean the cinematic text. Remember, cinema is also a text. Film is a text. You have a book, right? You have a book, you call it a text. Cinema is also read like a text. I'm sure that you are aware of those French critics, French film critics, who started. These are the filmmakers who started off their careers as film critics, and they contributed regularly to a journal called Cahiers du Cinema, that is Journal of Cinema. Okay, so what they said is that director is an author, auteur. Every director is an author, and I mean not every director, but director should be an author. Director shouldn't just be metro song, that is putting together a scene, but he should be an author. So an author who creates a text, and text is cinema. So remember these terms. Those of you who are already way too deep in your academics and film studies, this is nothing new for you. But those of you who are still, uh, trying to find your way in film studies, or you are interested in it, and perhaps you want to pursue careers in cinema, media, etc. I think these are the terms, these are the concepts that you should know. What does an author do? According to the French filmmakers, author should leave his or her own distinctive stamp on a text. When you read a novel, you know this is a Jane Austen work. When you read a novel, you know this is a let's say a work by For example, um, Amitabh Ghosh novel. Okay, so you know this, right? There is a stamp. There is a certain kind of a style. So similarly, a director's style should be very well etched on the movie. So therefore, she becomes an author. Okay. You like commercial Hindi cinema, you know that we have someone like Farah Khan, we have someone like Sanjay Leela Bhansali. All of them, they have their own creative stamp on them, on the kinds of movies. People who imitate them, they are like, we call them, oh, this is a Sanjay Leela Bhansali kind of movie. When we were watching Kalank, for example, Kalank, that was a Karan Johar production, and most people said, okay, this is a Karan Johar production, which is directed, which seems to be directed by Sanjay Leela Bhansali, which was not. But you know, the mise or the language of Kalank was so similar to the language of Sanjay Leela Bhansali kind of movie. So Sanjay Leela Bhansali therefore becomes an author. People imitate. Farah Khan kind of cinema is, she has her own, you know, zany and fiesty kind of style, and people imitate her. Okay, so whether you like them or not, see, we are not talking about, we are not imposing our tastes on you, or we are not telling you that, you know, you go and watch them. You don't like them, don't watch them. But what we are saying is that every film director, every major film director has his or her own stamp on a movie. Sometimes producers also have a leave a stamp. David O. Selznick, he never directed a movie, but he controlled production in such a way that his stamp was there, or was there on every movie. He made one of the greatest films ever, Gone with the Wind, and he was the one who brought everything together. He selected the text, he selected the actors, he chose how to create the sets. He was in complete control. He was hiring and firing directors uh, on a weekly basis. So what happens is that the producer becomes in control. He becomes an author. Of course, it's a very contested term, but I'm just giving an example. So when we are talking about film genre, genre is defined as an interaction between institutions, that is media producers and critics, audience, and the text. So those are the, so every genre appeals to certain kinds of critics or certain kinds of audiences. You don't like Karan Johar movie, fine. It is your prerogative to dislike. But he has his own brand and he has his own audience. You don't like SLB's kind of cinema, but he has his own brand and he has his own audience. So their films fall under a particular genre, a particular category. Okay, so therefore audience look forward to these directors, and they say, okay, I want this, I like this director so much, I'm looking forward. So that becomes like, you know, genres are very nice things actually. We need not dismiss them off. They suggest that there is a shared knowledge between producer, director, and the audiences. When you know that Quentin Tarantino has made a movie, you know that it is going to be full of cinephilia. It is going to be a very meta movie. Unless and until you know a lot about films, you won't be able to appreciate his films in entirety. Okay, so audiences, for audiences, genres are very important. They choose the text they wish to consume. It is important. So whether you want to watch, so today I want to watch a Fellini movie. Okay, I want to watch 8.5. I will go to that with a certain expectation. But I want to watch an action movie tomorrow. Okay, it doesn't matter who directed it, who produced it, but I want to watch an action movie. Okay, that is my genre. So I'm not going to Fellini for a hardcore action where I want a lot of uh, let's say a lot of people running all over and jumping all over. So I want something like Mission Impossible. So I wouldn't be watching Fellini that day. I want to watch a certain madcap comedy one day. I'm not going to watch a Godard movie for that. So I will choose my genre and I know what text I wish to consume. It also helps us understand the text and we can talk about that text. If you want to know more about genres, how genres operate, I would suggest that you watch, that you read something by um, uh, Rick Altman. Uh, it's called Film Genre. It's a very important book. So he gives you a variety of genres and the distinctive categories of these and characteristics of the genres and action, animation, film noir, gangster, historical movies, and martial arts and musical. Musical is an important genre. Of course, in our country, every there are 8 or 9 songs in every movie, but they are not necessarily musicals. But then Hollywood looks at musical as a very distinct category, as a very distinctive genre. Singing in the Rain, for example, Sound of Music, these films with lots of songs and dance situations. So it is an important genre. And when it is a musical, then some people stay away, that no, this is not our way, or this is not our taste. We don't want to watch too many. Some people are clearly put off by musicals. Some people are clearly put off by science fiction movies. So that I know many people who want to watch very serious films and they say, okay, we are not going to sit and watch something, a movie like the Matrix trilogy. Okay, science fiction, we don't know what's happening here at all, or the Blade Runner. So, genre actually warn people. They tell you whether you should be watching them or consuming them or talking about them or writing or reading about them. And then of course we have in Hollywood you have that gangster and western cinema, which has always been there. So, there are ebb and rise of this genre, these two genres all the time. They sometimes they disappear, sometimes they make a comeback, but they are very popular genres. uh, yeah. uh, so we also have cinema and ideology, and there are because see when we research in film studies, when we write about cinema, so you will find that many films are can be read not just by aesthetic um, aspects, but also by ideological considerations. So, in this context, you can understand that a vast majority of films, see, by ideology, we don't mean taking or talking politics, necessarily talking about politics. But these films, they carry and endorse certain kind of ideology, certain kind of attitude or behavior or a set or system of beliefs. They may not be very overt. Okay, it is there, and it is there, and it is overtly it's there. I will quote Jean-Luc Godard, where he says that all films are political films. He is not necessarily talking about taking sides in politics. Okay, but he is talking about like party system, party politics, but he is talking about certain kind of ideology. So remember that could be ideology, could be anything. Okay. There are certain films that have a very strong undercurrent of feminist ideology, or that certain kinds of films that propose a very dominant kind of masculine domination ideology. For example, if you watch these, in the 70s, Clint Eastwood kinds of films, Dirty Harry, they were very popular. And Dirty Harry was not endorsing any political party. He was not a Democrat or not a Republican. But then he had very strong views on race and gender, and also on law and order. So you watch those movies, and those movies today, they look quite outdated with our, with us, with our modern contemporary mm, theoretical background and theoretical underpinnings. Today most people are extremely dismissive of the Dirty Harry series of Clint Eastwood, but in the 70s they were very popular. Okay, so you may call him chauvinistic and you may call him racist, but those were extremely popular movies, and the hero did espouse a certain kind of ideology. Yeah. Uh, author theory, of course, we have talked about. Authorism it's a French word. Simply it means author. Okay, but it is something that has caused a lot of controversy and critical debates. Okay, so author theory is not a very simple theory. Most people say that why should just the director get all the credit? Okay, because film is not a sum total of just film is a sum total of lot of people coming together and producing or making a movie. Okay, so it is a collaborative effort. Filmmaking is one of the most collaborative effort. I mean, for example, not just the people who actually make the movie, but the people who distribute the movie and who help screen the movie, they are also part of that film. Okay, so the way your movie is screened at a particular theater, that could also determine the fate of your movie. So all these things come into the play, and therefore when a movie is such a collaborative effort, then the question is that how can one person claim to be the author or the sole creator of a movie? So this is something that is highly debatable, and it has always been highly contested. Remember that. So we also we have something like Roland Barthes told us, and he has given us the death of the author. Okay, the author is dead, so the director is dead. Once a text is released and it's out there in everybody's hands, all of us have sort of we can add meaning, and we can create the kind of meaning that we want to have or we want to read in that text. So therefore, author cinema or author theory has been challenged a lot, particularly by the influence of new criticism, yeah, which was a school of literary criticism. And the new critics also argued that critics made an intentional fallacy when they tried to interpret works of art by speculating about what the author meant based on the author's personality or life experiences. And the new critics also argued that that information or speculation about an author's intention was secondary to the words on the page as the basis of the experience of reading literature. So, what are we saying? That just as it happens in a work of literature, similarly, in a cinematic work also, once a movie is out there, anybody can read any meaning into it. Okay, therefore you find a lot of critics fighting over the same movie all the time. I'll give you a very recent example. I'm sure some of you, because I'm just assuming you are all um, cinephiles here. So there is a movie which I'm sure that you have at least read the reviews, but if you haven't, please look this up. It's called Annette, Annette. It stars Adam Driver and Marion Cotillard, and it has recently been premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and it has received extremely negative reviews from a certain set of movie critics. But then, as more and more people are watching that movie, they have been able to understand a lot of me. No, a lot of they have been able to recognize a lot of beauty in that movie. So there are some people who are condemning the movie, and there is an equal number of people who are endorsing the movie. And both schools are very influential schools and very influential critics. So it depends on us as consumers. What are our tastes, and what kinds of movies do we enjoy, and can we the movie has been criticized basically because of its lots of grotesque imagery. So perhaps and also because of its like in the portrayal of a damaged, mm, uh, a damaged masculinity and toxic masculinity. Okay, so you can there is a lot for everyone to read into that movie and appreciate that movie. Okay. um when I teach my, so coming back to what, who are the major authors that I generally talk about. So, of course, the French film authors, cinema of Truffaut, Godard, of course. Uh, so those are the films that I have been teaching very regularly in my classes. And let me tell you, these films are available. Many of these films are available online, and they come with subtitles. So, if you are a student, please do watch them. If you are a teacher of film studies, then don't hesitate to use these films in your classroom, because these are extremely important filmmakers, and your students need to know about that. So yeah, so those are the filmmakers who I often refer to. Cinema of Ingmar Bergman, that's great Swedish director. uh, Cinema of Louis Buñuel. I often teach the Exterminating Angel, and also the Le Chien Andalo. Okay, so Buñuel cinema. Uh, when I teach surrealism in cinema, I often refer to the works of Jean Cocteau. So those are I'm basically talking about those filmmakers, from not just Hollywood but from other parts of the world. So Bergman and Fellini and Vittorio De Sica, uh, 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 the great Japanese masters, okay, Kurosawa. Okay, so those are essential. These are essential filmmakers. It's all right to read, to discuss our own cinema, regional cinema. I mean, Indian cinema has always been. There are such there are lots of major movies, important movies in our country that need recognition, and we need to read them, and we must talk about them and teach them. At the same time, we should also understand what is happening in world cinema. Okay, so it's important as teachers we need to know what is happening in world cinema, and we have to go to the very beginning. Okay, so these are the important filmmakers that you should know about. And then, of course, I teach because my students enjoy a lot of Hitchcock. Okay, now Hitchcock never goes out of fashion. Hitchcock has been imitated by a number of directors all over the world, and he is truly an author. So some of his seminal movies, he was very prolific, as we all know. So Hitchcock is extremely important. I often teach Hitchcock, of course, Orson Welles, A Touch of Evil, and of course Citizen Kane. Stanley Kubrick, Doctor Strangelove, and A Clockwork Orange. So those are essential movies. So when we talk about pedagogy of cinema, I think we need to look at our cinema, our not just our mainstream cinema, our parallel cinema also, our regional cinema also. Uh, at the same time, we have to consider world cinema as well. There are a lot of people who often talk about, that Hollywood has taken over. Of course, Hollywood has taken over. That is inevitable, and it's not because of anything else. It's because one is a language. People understand the English language across the world, so therefore the popularity. And also they have this huge mechanism of production, distribution, exhibition, uh, film festivals, of course. So these films get a lot of exposure. So therefore, the importance of that. Therefore, we feel that there is so much of Hollywood in our life. But at the same time, other cinemas also deserve a lot of attention. Okay, so contemporary Chinese cinema, for example, is great. Okay, especially uh, fifth and sixth generation of Chinese, the so-called fifth and sixth generation of Chinese directors, Jiang Yimou and Wong Kar-wai, they have made excellent cinema. So I think those are the cinemas that we should be, as teachers and as learners and as consumers of cinema, we should be at least familiar with. Okay, so at least that's what I do most of the time in my class. I do a lot of transnational cinema in the global times. We have our the diasporic filmmakers who are doing a wonderful work. For example, Meera Nair made the beautiful The Namesake. Okay, so those are the films that we should be. Those films are getting a lot of international attention, and I think we should be very much aware of these films. I also do a fair amount of theory in my class. So gender studies is one of the most something that I do very often. So most common, I would say, theory that I do in my class, theories of reception and spectatorship, cinema and globalization, and of course postmodernism, and then post-truth cinema. So that's the kind of cinema. Those are the theories. So there is a lot of theory in my courses, and I think if you know your text well, and if you can explain well, students do appreciate theories also. And I'm talking because I get not just my MA students, but we also have our BTech students. You cannot force feed theories to them, but theories have to be couched in a way so that they also understand and appreciate theories along with appreciating cinema. Okay, so these are some of the things I wanted to share with you. And I before I wind up, I wanted to share this particular film. Sorry, not exactly a film, but it's a film clipping with you, and I thought you would be able to enjoy it. Let's talk about it then. Wait a minute. So I'm going to because I do realize that we cannot be showing lot of screen. A lot of we cannot show the because of the Copyright Act. We can't we cannot screen the full uh, clip, but I do recommend that you watch this particular scene on the YouTube. It is freely available. Yeah. So this particular scene from I'm sure you all of you are aware of this movie, Quentin Tarantino's Inglorious Bastards. And why I am interested in this movie, one is it's a very it's an excellent example of postmodernist cinema. Tarantino blends a lot of features of old Hollywood, contemporary cinema, history. He alters history. If you have seen the movie, you know how the movie ends. He gives his own spin to a series of historical events which are real, which are facts, but then he also blends it with his trademark fantasy. Okay, so therefore it is a brilliant example of postmodernist cinema. This particular scene, if you watch it carefully, it is about this girl whose family has been uh, destroyed by this very evil Nazi colonel. And when it so happens by some chance that she is in this restaurant, and the same man who has exterminated her family, and he comes there, and he is sharing the restaurant table with her, and she's filled with disgust and revulsion, as well as those tragic memories come back to her, come back to haunt her. So the extreme close up that Tarantino uses, the camera is placed on the girl's face, and um, as you watch the clipping, okay, because it's a very elaborate scene where they eat and where they drink coffee and etc. And the way Tarantino uses the extreme close-ups of their faces, extreme close-ups of the food items on the table, and what is he trying to communicate? Is that deeply disturbed psychology of this girl, okay, who is the protagonist of the movie. Okay, so those are the ways in which you can read a scene. Okay, so a director puts together a lot of things on in a particular scene in order to communicate certain kinds of images and emotions. So this is the way I think what I was trying to do here is that suggest to you how films can be read, how films can be appreciated, and how films can be understood. If we are aware of the language of cinema, if we know what is the genre of cinema, if you know who is the director of this film, then you would be able to appreciate a film much better. You would be able to talk about films much better. You would be able to write about them. And if you want to go into media studies or you want to be researchers, then you can do that also better. So this is what I was trying to do. Thank you very much, and I hope it was useful. Thank you.